Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. By now, you've heard that America has a new federal holiday, Juneteenth, National Independence Day. So I think first we need to discuss what Juneteenth is and what it's about and what's good about Juneteenth, but also some of the things that are a little troubling about the name of this new federal holiday and how some on the left are weaponizing it, particularly the Democrat media, who are spinning the story to advance a narrative against Republicans, which isn't exactly surprising. So let's start with what it is. Juneteenth is the new federal holiday that Joe Biden just signed into law, celebrating the effective end of slavery in the United States. Now, why should we celebrate Juneteenth? Because after Republican Abraham Lincoln announced the end of slavery in America with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, in some places where Union troops had not yet arrived to enforce the proclamation, slavery continued as a practice for a few more years, like in the Republic of Texas, which until 1865, it was 2 years later. That's when Union troops first arrived. 258,000 slaves in Texas were permanently freed on June 17th, and the holiday commemorating that moment, that's celebrated on June 19th going forward. And it's been actually widely recognized in Texas for a long time and some other states, but particularly in Texas. Now, as conservatives who believe in freedom and liberty and limited government, we of all people should celebrate the effective date of true freedom for people in America and not just, people of white people. I mean, all people. So in fact, freedom is a great thing. Celebrate freedom. Freedom of people who were in slavery is a good and noble idea, and Republicans were willing to spill their own blood in significant amounts in order to achieve this goal. Now, there were about 700,000 Americans that died in the Civil War, of which about 360,000 were Union troops. So consider this. America lost about 2% of its population, or perhaps around 6 million people, I think is the rough math. So, by the way, that's the future. That's the reparation for future discussion on reparations, paid with blood in full. It's sometimes hard to fathom what it must have been like for a nation who went to war with itself, killed its own neighbors and countrymen, and risked the dissolution of the American project. But slavery was such an evil institution that Lincoln felt he had no other choice. Now, I love celebrating any kind of victory over Democrat tyranny, so commemorating Juneteenth, I think, is a good idea. In fact, it's such a good idea that Texas, like I said, very red state, has been officially celebrating it since 1980. Juneteenth is also such a good idea that it was Donald Trump, a Republican president, who wanted to make it a holiday before Joe Biden. Yes, Trump wanted to make Juneteenth a federally recognized holiday as part of his platinum plan for Black empowerment. See, Republicans are for freedom. We are for celebrating liberty and freedom from government tyranny. That is our brand. That is our idea. It always has been. Which brings me to what's kind of troubling about the title of the bill, the act, Juneteenth, and how it's being spun in Democrat media. So first off, the name is a little concerning. The full name is concerning, and that is Juneteenth National Independence Day. Something like Juneteenth National Emancipation Day, I think maybe would have been maybe a more explanatory name, because now what we have are two holidays called National Independence Day for America, and I don't think that was entirely by accident. Words matter, and these words effectively create a parallel Independence Day in the United States. And this is what's kind of troubling about the name of this holiday for Juneteenth, because it seems to be yet another way, another National Independence Day, a way to divide America further, all brought to you by the proclaimed Party of Unity. So let's be really clear about this. There's one Independence Day for America and Americans. It's July 4th, 1776. And it's when you had our founders, our enshrined ideas about human freedom and dignity that made the liberation of slaves in America all but inevitable. Now, after all, if you intended to hold on to the practice of slavery, then you don't write the words that all men are created equal in the Declaration of Independence. Now, from the moment those words were written, the writing was on the wall for the evil institution known as slavery. But also, 1776 is our true Independence Day as a nation because it marked independence from the tyranny of British rule. So 1776 is about the creation of the freest, most unique country ever founded, a newly independent government founded on the principle of liberty for each individual. And we shouldn't name another holiday Independence Day because it's divisive and it's just downright confusing. And again, that's what I think is troubling here, that the name is intended, not by all perhaps, but some definitely intended for it to be divisive. I I mean, it's the party of unity. It's Democrats and this always busy division of America, except this time it's with the name of a holiday. Now let's remember, at the time of the Civil War, slaveholders were Democrats. They were the people who were promoting it. They were the people who were defending it. Let's not forget who set the record for filibuster in Congress against the Civil Rights Act. I could go on. They've always been on the wrong side of history. So it's the same party and ideology that divided America by holding on to slavery, which then promoted, we ended up with a Civil War. And then after, you have the Republican North defeating the Democrat South, and it's the Democrats that continued to hold on to their slaves anyway until Union troops reached places like Texas and effectively enforced the end of slavery. And once again, it's a Republican president, Trump, who pushes for a Juneteenth holiday, but it's the party of division, Democrats, that swoop in and use it as an opportunity to divide by naming it not just Juneteenth, but National Independence Day, thereby effectively creating a second Independence Day in America. The party of unity, always dividing, always memory holding history, and then using media to bash Republicans or independents even, whose last president was for Juneteenth being recognized nationally in the first place. Democrat-controlled press has been incredibly busy in article after article pointing out that 14 Republicans were opposed to creating this new federal holiday. These articles point out accurately that only Republicans voted against the new holiday. And in a climate where opposition to something like a national holiday for Juneteenth will immediately and guaranteed immediately be called racist, you can see why the Democrat media is using the opportunity to slam these Republicans that voted against Juneteenth. I mean, some of them have raised some legitimate concerns about the name, and it's not racist to bring up any kind of questions they may have. And this is what Congressman Thomas Massie had to say about Juneteenth, National Independence Day. He says, quote, "I fully support creating a day to celebrate the abolition of slavery, a dark portion in our nation's history. However, naming this day National Independence Day will create confusion and push Americans to kind of pick one of those 2 days as their Independence Day based on their racial identity. Why can't we name this Emancipation Day and come together as Americans and celebrate that day together as Americans," end quote. I think that's a great point. And then you have Montana Representative Matt Rosendale. He released a statement on his vote against the national holiday for Juneteenth, the National Independence Day Part 2. He says, quote, "Let's call an ace an ace. This is an effort by the left to create a day out of whole cloth to celebrate identity politics as part of its larger efforts to make critical race theory the reigning ideology of our country. Since I believe in treating everyone equally regardless of race and that we should be focused on what unites us rather than our differences, I will vote no," end quote. And I think that I think both of them are bringing up some legitimate concerns, although I always think that it's great to celebrate liberty. But these are legitimate concerns that these two particular Republican members of Congress are raising. And it's not racist to suggest that Juneteenth, National Independence Day, as so named by the Biden administration, might be purposefully divisive and used to that purpose by some. And I think that there's some proof of that already, because over the weekend, if you followed the Juneteenth 2021 hashtag on Twitter, you might have noticed something. This appeared next to nearly every tweet. It's that raised communist fist symbol. Wherever you see that fist or some version of it, you know that it's always in the past historically been used to represent Marxism, and not just in the United States. Of course, not every single person who uses the raised fist emoji or image, etc., is a Marxist, but it's used more often than not to celebrate Marxist. And when you see it in these tweets that were trending, Juneteenth 2021, a lot of them, there were a significant number of them that were promoting militantism and authoritarianism. And that's why you have a lot of groups like Antifa that use this fist, right? It's concerning to see that next to tweet after tweet for Juneteenth, because we all know it, and let's just be honest about it. That symbol is a political statement. Here's another troubling sign that some definitely want to use Juneteenth for division. This is what Grammy winner Macy Gray had to say about the American flag in an op-ed from MarketWatch. She says, quote, "Like the Confederate, it is tattered, dated, divisive, and incorrect. It no longer represents democracy and freedom. It no longer represents all of us. It's not fair to be forced to honor it. It's time for a new flag," end quote. And she even designed a suggested new flag to replace the current one. And this might seem like just kind of a bad idea from this pop singer, but I think we're going to be hearing more rhetoric and ideas like this from the left and their party. This is an injection of race and politics into the symbol of the United States. And you thought that the toppling of those statues was just what, some white trust fund socialists and college kids looking for something fun to do on a Friday night? No. This is troubling because we're becoming a nation that's obsessed with color. We're led to because of Marxist activism. We're becoming incredibly politically tribal. We move from colorblindness to color obsessed. And only one party is really pushing this, and that's the Democrat Party. Juneteenth should be an opportunity for unity. Yet another example in American history where we got it right. We move closer to living out our best ideals, treating everyone equally before the law, despite the fact that the Democrat Party stood in the way at every single turn historically. But instead, it looks like Juneteenth may be used to further polarize and divide the nation along color lines. And honestly, pause to this, but that's sort of the intended effect, because Marxism went from being just an economic tool of division between the haves and the have-nots, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, to now it's ethnicity that Marxists are using. So it's gone from economic to now cultural, to now using ethnicity as a way to divide. And that's what we're seeing now unfold with all of this critical race theory. And all of this, by the way, from the Party of Unity. The Party of Unity, who tells us daily that the biggest threat to America is white supremacy. The Party of Unity that pumps critical race theory into every federal agency, including our military, and is pushing it via teachers' unions into K-12 education all across the country, dividing every last person by color. If you're not worried yet, you should be. The Democrat Party, this is the party that's been promoting racial division in place of any kind of policy. It's the party of slavery. It's the party of denying women the right to vote. It's the party of putting Japanese Americans in internment camps. It's the party of segregation and Jim Crow and the KKK. And they have been using race to divide America for eons now, and they're still using it today. Why? Because they love power, and the more divided America is, the easier it is for a Democrat-run government to become a strongman and rule over individuals. They want Lord of the Flies in America. Just look at the cities that they run, because then they can increase their power, their control over the individual. So as this party, the Democrat Party, really in name only, it's all Marxist ideology, as they talk about unity, ask yourself, does America feel more united? Does the country feel like it's coming together? Or do we seem to be coming apart at the seams by creating things like 2 national independence days instead of 1? We'll let you decide. So coming up, they're calling the race for the Attorney General the Holy War of Texas between George P. Bush and incumbent Attorney General Ken Paxton. Now, Paxton says he is the true MAGA conservative. It's a MAGA off. That's about right. We'll see what George P. Bush has to say. He joins us next. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces and as a CIA contractor. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to Evan's vision and mission of supporting veteran law enforcement and first responder causes. So this summer, Black Rifle Coffee Company invites you to enjoy your coffee, and that doesn't mean just the great taste, but the places you drink it, the adventures. Just drink your coffee. It's black coffee. That's how I take it. Black and bitter like my heart. It's delicious. So whether you're brewing the perfect cup of pour over before kicking butt at work or cracking open a can of 300 on your next backcountry mission, Black Rifle Coffee is here to fuel your way wherever summer takes you. So visit blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV to order yours and use Dana TV at checkout for 20% off your purchase. That's blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV. George P. Bush is Texas Land Commissioner and also now running for Attorney General of Texas. But incumbent Ken Paxton is standing in his way, and national and state press are calling it the Holy War of Texas. So we're going to watch all of this unfold. This is an election of elections, and George P. Bush joins us now. It's good to be with you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to get your thoughts. What do you make of that Holy War of Texas title? Because you're going into probably one of the most watched elections, one of the most watched races in Texas.
Well, it's important for our state. I think it's important for our country when you look at this assault on our state's values and conservative ideas and conservative free market principles, not only in states like Texas, but throughout the South and freedom-loving areas of our country. And so, rightfully so, this is going to be a closely watched race. In the meantime, we're hitting the ground running, talking about border security, backing the thin blue line, human trafficking in Texas, and restoring accountability to this important office. So we're excited to engage the media, inform the public about the challenging issues that confront our state, and obviously the failures of our leadership in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, of course. And obviously with the Texas changing, got a lot of Californians moving in, and I don't think every election is going the way that everybody thinks it's going to go. I want to immediately just get all of the, I want to get this out of the way, not to have the interview go as me pitting you up against Ken Paxton, but there's certain things that are said that I think a lot of voters that are watching you that may be unfamiliar with you or unfamiliar with your record or background, they may be kind of wondering for themselves. Because whenever anybody goes for Texas Land Commissioner, the first thought that pops into my mind is, where else is this person going to go? Because once you become Texas Land Commissioner, there's kind of a ladder that you climb, and you can't come out of Texas and run for the presidency unless you've been land commissioner. And that's one of the things that Paxton had said about you. He said that he also doubted your sincerity of support for former President Trump. He said that he's got a mentality that he's going to be president someday, going into that. And then he said that he's just going after, talking about you, that you're just going after Paxton's seat because you didn't want to go after Abbott's or go after LG because of fundraising issues. Just to get all of that out of the way. I mean, that kind of seems kind of like low-hanging fruit for obviously your opponent, but what do you say to stuff like that for people who point that out?
Well, I'm focused on the here and the now. I've been privileged to serve my country and our nation's military for 10 years, and I've been privileged to serve as land commissioner for 8. And when I look at the statewide offices, I see a crisis of moral leadership, a lack of moral compass in this important key law enforcement position. And it's required to have the lead prosecutor of the state be above reproach. And I don't want to delve into the details in terms of his criminal indictment and the FBI investigation and the allegations entrusted by Christian attorneys that have since left the office. My focus is on this office, 4,200 employees that are needing a leader, somebody that can step in, roll up their sleeves, and fight for conservative values in the courthouse. And that's what the race is. And so he's punching down. I'll let him do that, but I'm just going to focus on the issues.
And talking with George P. Bush, who is currently Texas Land Commissioner, now running for Attorney General of the Republic of Texas, a lot of people have been really paying attention to the powers of Attorney General. And I think before, everyone kind of knew what the Office of Attorney General did, but they really saw it in action with these lockdowns, that this wasn't just nationwide, this was state by state. I wanted to get your thoughts on how far lockdowns went in Texas specifically, and if anything like this should occur again, what do you think that the approach from the AG's office should be towards something like this?
Well, I think that we need to encourage more free market principles, not listen to people like Dr. Fauci as much, and rely upon our local instincts in our communities and listen to our business leaders. I talk to small business owners, restaurants, bar owners. I was proud to start my campaign actually in a Texas bar, one of the first to reopen after the pandemic. And we've got to return back to the idea that in our country, we can allow individuals to make their decisions, to allow them to manage risk and to emerge from the shadows as they see fit. And we, can always do better. And next time around, I assure the people of Texas that we are going to do that better, because lo and behold, Texas has the lowest amount of cases. We're high on vaccinations. And when you entrust people's communities, small businesses, good things happen. That's what our country used to be about. Unfortunately, we've run away and listened more to bureaucrats and folks in D.C.
Yeah, and I think it also, those sorts of orders, don't you think that they kind of overlook the self-preservation of the individual as well? People don't want to get sick, and they don't want to expose themselves to any kind of risk like that or get anyone else sick. And I just thought that was missing from this whole equation this entire time. Your thought?
Yeah, it was an undue punishment on small businesses. And I can tell you as a father, and I know you are a parent as well, that digital education did not work in Texas. So I was proud that we reopened our schools quicker. And next time around, I think even the blue states will reopen quicker. But we saw, well-protected teachers unions in California educate illegals in South California before they educated legal citizens. And so I think there's going to be a total change in education, a total change in the way that we run our economies. And this has been a true lesson in terms of entrusting the individual. I think you're absolutely right. And we forget that, whether it's looking at our Constitution and the brilliance of the founders, or just our general philosophy of entrusting the free markets.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and with trusting the individual as well. So Governor Greg Abbott has made Texas what a sanctuary state for the Second Amendment. In Missouri, they had the new Second Amendment Preservation Act, which is arguing the supremacy clause of the Constitution regarding law enforcement within the state. And this gets into, not to get in the weeds with our audience, but like the Prince v. U.S., where you can't have the federal government forcing states to basically enact and run federal programs. Along these lines, because now the federal government is intimating that they're going to go after the state of Missouri for what they've done. If something like this were to happen, whether it's with the sanctuary state for Second Amendment or whether it's with the border wall that Abbott says he's now going to start constructing his own at the southern border, because the AG's office is going to be right in the middle of all of this, how do you respond to something like that if that comes from the Biden administration and they want to say, wait a minute, hold up, we want Texas to act actually not in the best interest of Texans?
Well, we'll fight for the Second Amendment every day and all day. This is a proud tradition in our state, and this is an example of federal overreach. I was proud that the Alamo hosted the governor along with legislators to sign 7 bills that expanded Second Amendment rights. We joined 20 other states that allow for constitutional carry in Texas. So what better place than the cradle of Texas liberty to sign those bills? But there's a lot more that we can do as well in working with law enforcement and use this as an opportunity to be a force multiplier for law enforcement in the state of Texas. And proud to be a supporter of Second Amendment, and we'll fight for that. As it relates to the border wall, the governor is stepping forward in terms of finishing the Trump wall. We need to not only finish that, but restore the Remain in Mexico policy. Unfortunately, with Biden and Kamala Harris, I guess we're coming up on 100 days since she's agreed to actually come down to the border. I don't know if we'll ever see it. But in the meantime, Texas will emerge. I was proud as land commissioner to pledge 250,000 acres that are at or near our southern border to help complete this wall. We still have over about 250 miles that were appropriated by Congress, and I'm looking at bringing a lawsuit against the Biden administration to force deadbeat bureaucrats to get off the sideline and use those dollars that were appropriated to finish the wall. This is an absolute national security crisis with over 200,000 apprehensions this past month alone, with only 18,000 Border Patrol agents keeping the watch every single day. So as a member of our nation's military, I view this as our bigger threat that we need to confront.
Yes, and you served in the Navy as well. That's what you're talking about. You'd served in the Navy for 10 years, and we appreciate your service on that. You bring up the immigration and obviously the fight with the Biden administration. And this was a few years ago. Jim Brewer was governor of Arizona. It was wild to me that you had Texas and Arizona and these border states that were simply and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I didn't read that they were trying to extend their authority beyond what their state constitution allowed in terms of enforcement for illegal entry or apprehension. But the Obama-Biden administration then filed suit and was preventing these states from effectively implementing and following their own state constitution. Do you anticipate anything like that happening with however Texas is handling the border, particularly, you mentioned that wall down there, and then Abbott pledging to continue building it or do his own wall. Are you expecting something like a challenge like that from the Biden-Harris administration, or maybe are they not that malicious or litigious? I don't know. I think that maybe remains to be seen.
Well, I think Texas law, we're on very solid ground because the governor in his press conference last week talked about using trespassing law as the local manner by which we can interdict the illegal immigration and the flood that we're seeing on the southern border. And so he's clearing out and providing for prison space so that we can hold the detainees. But as I mentioned to you, at 200,000 per month with projections escalating during summer months, which is what we typically see on the southern border, we're going to need a lot of space to keep up with that flow. What I'm more worried about, Dana, is the negligence of the federal government. The fact that they are not building enough facilities. They're not processing folks. They're not COVID testing when they come through Customs Border Patrol. They're not giving court appearances. They are giving you a notice of appear, and you can build a legal narrative for being a resident in our country if you abuse the wide loophole that we have under our asylum laws here in our country. So until we close that, that's what I'm more concerned about. And just this week, there's an announcement that any migrant family that shows up the border that is one of the asylum eligible countries will not get a court appearance, and they will be welcomed into our country. So again, in the wake of the Capitol insurrection, we can build walls and barbed wires to defend the Capitol, but we're not doing anything on our southern border. There's something wrong here, and we've lost order, and it's nothing but chaos. And I encourage anybody to come down to the border, visit with our Customs and Border Patrol, spend some time with them to learn about this crisis that we're seeing, and it's profiting the bloody drug cartels on the southern border while we do this, all because of the false promises of Biden and Harris.
Yeah, those, and who we still have yet to see at the border, the borders are, talking to George P. Bush, Texas Land Commissioner, running for Attorney General of Texas. You had mentioned, you used the phrase a little bit ago, Trump wall, and I thought that was very interesting. Now, kind of taking this out of Texas politics for a moment, looking at this 30,000-foot view, you and I are of the same generation. I grew up with your uncle and your father being governor of Florida, and I grew up with your uncle running the country, and 9/11 was a very huge moment in my development as a conservative. And I have been watching everything as it unfolds, and I know Trump, he said some nice things about you. I think what he said was the Bush that got it right. I think that's something along those lines is what Trump said about you in his way. How do you, because you have a name that goes with you, and a lot of people immediately want to make assumptions on your record and on your future actions based on your family and your name, and you seem to be doing a lot of work to try to separate yourself from that. Do you think that's going to be enough for conservatives? And what would you say to people who are like, oh, here's another Bush, it's the Bush dynasty? What do you tell people when they bring that up as a point?
Well, when I first ran for office in 2014, I just reminded Texans that I'm going to be the one late up night taking the call. And as Attorney General, there have been 4 Border Patrol agents that have lost their lives in the line of duty, and 17 police law enforcement officials in the streets of Texas. And I've handwritten notes to all those families, and I want to continue that to be a shoulder to cry on. I've done that for military veterans in Texas, and I'll do that for law enforcement and first responders. This race is really about me. It's my name on the ballot. I think my support of President Trump goes back to 2016. I was one of the first statewide to support him. I raised over $1.5 million for Republican Party causes to help create the high watermark for Republican Party politics here, where we got a supermajority in the House and the Senate. And I want to continue that legacy. And I have a better record of carrying on America First policies as a military veteran, as a former teacher, and a former lawyer. So I'm ready for this fight. I'm going to run a grassroots campaign just like I did last time. I'm not going to do a Beto with 254 counties, but I'll hit maybe 240 of our 254 and reach out to anybody who's willing to hear my message, just like I did my first campaign.
Yeah, well, true. And speaking of your campaign, and we appreciate your time with us today, I thought national politics were nasty, and then I moved to Texas 8.5 years ago. And boy, oh boy, our Texas politics are nastier than like a Southern woman's gossip session. I've never seen anything like it. So I got to ask you, you also mentioned the Alamo. You mentioned legislators signing stuff at the Alamo. What is the latest with this? Because there was a huge fight. There were people who were calling your credentials on the carpet as a conservative, as a Republican, saying that, oh, this is George P. Bush is trying to redesign the whole Alamo. He is besmirching Texas history. And again, somebody who was born in Missouri and got to Texas as soon as I could, I realized the significance of the Alamo. And I'm watching all of this play out in the press. So what is the truth on this? Where does this stand as you're leaving this office of Land Commissioner and seeking higher office with AG? Where do you stand on this issue? Where are we at with the Alamo right now?
So this is the most important conservation project I believe, in our entire country, because this relates to the Shrine of Texas Liberty. And when I came in office in 2014, it was literally falling apart before our very eyes. So in partnership with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, I've now raised over $200 million with the county and with the city to make sure that we bring this back to the original battlefield of 1836. The 1836 plan is to bring the millions of visitors that come on an annual basis to this important, heroic location to this original glory. And what we've seen, unfortunately, is woke culture make its way to the state of Texas. There was a recent book that alleges that the battle and the Texas Revolution revolved around slavery, and that Davy Crockett and Sam Houston weren't heroes. And I'm here to tell you that they are. And as a military veteran who has brought my boys on Veterans Day to the Alamo several times, I think about their heroism. I think about the Texas revolutionaries who gave the last ultimate measure for the idea of freedom away from tyranny. And there's no better place to teach that story to future generations than what we're doing at the Alamo. So I welcome you, Dana, anytime you're in San Antonio, give you a VIP tour. we'll have the Phil Collins exhibit ready to go next summer on the backside of the grounds. But the church, the Long Barrack, will be around for hundreds more of years thanks to the work of the legislature and our office.
There's something humbling about the humble setting of the battlefield and, the souls that are still, the bodies that are still there. I think that there was an archaeological excavation because there was some bone fragments that were found near the cenotaph not long ago. But it's an amazing experience when you see American history take place at something that looks so humble and yet is so unbelievably powerful and reverent. And I was glad to see that people were standing up against woke culture, because some were saying, oh, they want to show both sides. It's the Alamo. Come on, there's one side, and there's one side at the Alamo. George P. Bush, we'd love to speak with you again, especially as this race heats up, going for Texas Attorney General, currently Texas Land Commissioner. Thanks for your time today. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you. Have a good one.
Of course. Take care. You too. All right, folks. Do you want to know how to get banned from Twitter? Comparing Brian Stelter, and this is all done facetiously, of course, to the Gimp from Pulp Fiction. That's one way to do it. Mike Davis is founder and president of Unsilenced Majority. They're all about, well, it's the Internet Accountability Project, and they're going to tell us all about it. Keep it here. Twitter is really into banning people these days. And of course, most of them happen to be conservatives, like Mike Davis. He's the founder and president of Unsilenced Majority and was recently suspended. If you're going to get suspended for something, go hard or go home. He criticized, we're just going to be real gentle with that, and we'll let him explain. He criticized CNN's Brian Stelter. So he's here to talk about that and the power of big tech. Mike, it's good to see you. And I mean, we kind of chuckle about it, but at the same time, it's absurdity to highlight absurdity. It's insane for what people can be suspended over, but then what they're seemingly protected from being suspended over. So just tell the folks, I mean, sure, I know that I love Pulp Fiction, I love Quentin Tarantino. What did you compare Brian Stelter to?
Thank you for having me. So a conservative big tech critic criticized Brian Stelter from CNN, comparing him to the Gimp from the movie Pulp Fiction. He got suspended. So I came to his defense and mocked Twitter for suspending someone for making this joke, and then they suspended me from Twitter for defending this guy for getting suspended. So, and actually, Dana, this is the third time in 6 months. I got suspended after that for raising an issue about President Joe Biden's immigration policy, and I got suspended for that as well. So I've been suspended 3 times in 6 months. They'll come back and say after we raise the issue with members of Congress, with people in the media on both sides, not just conservatives, but even liberal media, along with influencers on Twitter, Twitter will come back and say that it was a mistake that they were canceling, but in reality, it's because I'm running organizations that are trying to hold big tech accountable.
Yeah, and it's interesting because after I saw you and the issue of you and Stelter, apparently he's like a super protected principal on Twitter. I have no idea. But all of these people began sharing their stories. They said things they just spoke out in defense of you, didn't even retweet the original thing or say the original sentiment, and then they were suspended until they deleted that. And then you had your account, to be clear, you had your account reinstated, but not without first deleting that offending tweet, correct?
Well, actually, I didn't back down. I did not defend.
Oh.
I have not deleted any of the 3 tweets that got me suspended. Twitter backed. They backed down to pressure from Congress. They backed down to pressure from the media, again, on both sides, not just conservatives. They backed down to conservative influencers. I refuse to back down. Here's the issue. I have these good connections where I can go to members of Congress. I can go to the media. I can go to these influencers. What I'm trying to do with my organizations, both the Internet Accountability Project and Unsilenced Majority, is to give a voice to everyday Americans who get censored, who get silenced, who get deplatformed, who get canceled, and they don't have a voice, and we're trying to provide that voice for them.
And you bring up a really good point. You have these connections in Congress, whereas regular everyday people, even small business owners who are on social media, they're on Twitter, they don't have that access. And so that's what, when you're doing Unsilenced Majority and Internet Accountability Project, that's what you're looking to do is, okay, well, my contacts can be your contacts. Let's all work together and let's hold these companies accountable.
That's exactly right. We want to provide a voice for everyday Americans. And the key is that big tech has too much power. And the reason they have too much power is we have not enforced our century-old antitrust laws. We have antitrust amnesty in this country, and we need to end it. And we are for law enforcement. As conservatives, we do not believe in amnesty. And the best way to ensure a free market is to have a functioning market. And that's why we need to enforce our antitrust laws.
So help me talk to some of the conservatives out there who might be either lowercase L. I'm lowercase L on some things. I'm not capital L libertarian. But, you know, you have some people out there on the right who bring up issues. They say, well, you know, this is a private business and we don't want to compromise a principle by telling a private business what to do. I have one friend who is so resolutely, even at, you know, their own peril, they say, oh, well, antitrust laws, this is the opposite of capitalism, and I can't compromise my principle on that. But I think, well, what other acts do you actually support that you may not really go through that full thought process that really are kind of, you know, compromises of your principle? But this is a bigger issue here. What do you say to those people who make that argument and that kind of, because I feel like we have a lot of that on the right?
So I would say that in order to have a free market, you must have a functioning market. And the way you ensure a functioning market is to enforce our antitrust laws. They have been on the books for a century, and they are law enforcement. They are the opposite of regulation. You are targeting the bad actors. You are targeting the woke trillion-dollar big tech monopolists, Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, along with their, I call them the bar-fighting little brother, Twitter.
That's a great way to put
enforce
that.
our antitrust laws, they will not have the power to censor, silence, deplatform, or cancel conservatives. We have to enforce our antitrust laws. We do not believe in amnesty, and it is a pro-free market, conservative, Republican approach. Teddy Roosevelt trust busting.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good point as well. Talking with Mike Davis with Unsilenced Majority and Internet Accountability Project. Section 230, big O argument that I think now a lot more people have a greater understanding of Section 230 and exactly what created it and what it really does mean. Because I've never been for the repeal of 230, but I do think absolutely we have to have a modification because it seems crazy to think that editing algorithms or curating things based on political ideology isn't a form of essentially publishing. What are your thoughts on that? And didn't at one time Democrats agree with Republicans on it? Why did they stop? Where's the momentum?
Well, Section 230 was enacted by Congress back in 1996 to protect these internet infants, these internet startups, from getting crushed by the publishers in this country. It was to protect them from defamation lawsuits based upon what the users were posting. So fast forward 25 years now, and these internet infants from 1996 are now trillion-dollar big tech monopolists. And they have this antitrust amnesty plus Section 230 immunity, and they are turning the Section 230 immunity from a shield to protect them from defamation lawsuits based upon their users' post into a sword to go after conservatives and deplatform them, to cancel them. So we need to reform Section 230. I think there needs to be a debate whether it needs to be a straight up repeal or simply an amendment to 230, but the status quo is unacceptable.
Yeah, completely unacceptable, and it's gone beyond. It's gone beyond entirely what it was intended for. I just think if you have an entity like the Washington Post that's held responsible for unprotected speech or liability against unprotected speech, you know, Twitter actually determines the news. Their trending topics actually drive news stories. They are a publisher for all intents and purposes. They may not call themselves one, but they sure as heck function as one. Why should they be privileged and excluded?
They shouldn't, and it's even worse than that because it's Section 2. It's government granted immunity. They are essentially becoming government-sponsored censors. So we have to look at how is this not a First Amendment violation when you have the government sponsoring your censorship and actually encouraging your censorship? It needs to end.
That's a great point. That's a point that I have not considered prior. That is not a point that I've considered before our conversation here, because that's ultimately what it is. I mean, you can't try sue Twitter for defamation. It's never going to happen. And those cases are so hard to litigate anyway. Go up against a big corporation like Twitter, they can just say, oh, well, Section 230, we're excluded. We have that privilege. That's that Jack Dorsey privilege.
Yeah. I mean, they control, big tech controls the online public square. and they are if they tried to, let's say that they try to exclude people based upon their views on race, if they try to exclude African Americans based upon race, would they argue under Section 230 that they have the right to do that? That's a good question for big tech.
And I've seen you, I was actually looking at some other conversations that you've been involved in as well, because this, I mean, this even kind of can go past Twitter and Facebook. When you look at, for instance, things like Shopify or, you know, online purchasing where influencers sell stuff through social media platforms, and there exist these apps that actually process this stuff through those platforms, then it does get into an issue of commerce as well. So there's a lot of things to consider with this. Last quick question for you, talking with Mike Davis, founder and president of Unsilenced Majority. I saw this piece, Daily Caller had it. A group of centrist Democrats have asked House leaders to slow down consideration of a half dozen antitrust proposals opposed by big tech companies that the bills target. Well, why have they done that? That seems to be kind of a change of heart for them. What's going on?
So Google they're a $1 trillion monopolist, and they have a lot of influence in DC because they buy off these politicians. Congressman Ken Buck, the Republican from Colorado, is leading the bipartisan charge on these antitrust bills in the House. They are really important pieces of legislation that can hold big tech accountable for their abuses, for their market abuses. And you hear Republicans, even Republicans who we generally like on many other issues, like Jim Jordan from Ohio, opposing this legislation. Well, what I would say to those members like Jim Jordan, okay, if you oppose Congressman Buck's bipartisan plan, what's your plan? Besides taking Google's money, besides taking big tech's money and kicking the can down the road and giving them 4 more years of antitrust amnesty, what is your plan to hold big tech accountable?
Exactly. There you go. Mike Davis, good to talk with you. Appreciate what you do with this. You're going to have a long fight ahead, as you know, but we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. All right, folks, wokery is coming for everything, even Lord of the Rings. And I'm not making this up, hands to sky. You got to see this. Keep it here. To further prove that nothing, and I mean nothing, is safe from the woke scolds taking over the world, Lord of the Rings, well, kind of, is going woke. Yes, the revolution must continue, and not even Gandalf, a white heterosexual male, might I add, can stop it. He was always so repressive and oppressive anyway. Now I'm talking about the Tolkien Society. So what is the Tolkien Society? People are supposed to love J.R.R. Tolkien, supposedly. These are people who take I love Lord of the Rings, but these people have way too much time on their hands with wokery. These people, they formed a society to supposedly promote the works of Tolkien himself. This is their self-description, and I quote, "The Tolkien Society is an educational charity, literary society, and international fan club devoted to promoting the life and works of J.R.R. Tolkien." So this is essentially, it's a society for people who love Lord of the Rings, and they want to get together with other people who love Lord of the Rings and talk about Lord of the Rings. But as it turns out, and I consider myself a nerd on this, nerds can't nerd out without the fantasy world of wokery invading their fantasy world. So check out this actual agenda, a physical, literal, actual agenda for this year's seminar, first weekend of July. I have to read this to you. I saw it, so do you. At 2 p.m., those with gender dysphoria will not want to miss Gondor in Transition, a brief introduction to transgender realities in The Lord of the Rings. And at 3 p.m., here's a real barn burner, The Problem of Pain, portraying physical disability and the fantasy of J.R.R. Tolkien. And at 4:30, top off your coffee and get ready for The Invisible Other, Tolkien's Dwarf Women and the Feminine Lack. These seminars they're just enough to make you want to go and join Gollum in that cave, just to have a little bit of solitary existence and a peaceful life, rummaging around in the dark and in the crevasses for my precious. So that way, at least you don't have to spend time in a room with people who take fantasy worlds to this point. But this is what woke is. It's a fantasy to rule them all. Yes, it's a fictional world where unwell people believe things that aren't true, like that men can be women and appropriate that, and all of life is about obsessing over one's victimhood. And then they impose these beliefs on you. And once this fantasy invades, then it takes over and it removes everything that you've loved about formerly non-politicized things, like the NBA and movies and NASCAR and Lord of the Rings, and replacing it with wokery. So after the woke fantasy takes over, you're no longer talking about hobbits. You're talking about disabilities or about the dwarf women. I guess they never heard Gimli talk about how they look like the men. Suddenly, there's less talk about spells and wizards and more talk about intersectionality and anti-racism, which is really racism. Now, given that Tolkien was best friends with well, they were both actually Christian apologetics, but C.S. Lewis, and that Tolkien himself was a diehard Roman Catholic, it's a wonder that Tolkien actually hasn't been canceled altogether and the whole entire conference renamed. I mean, Middle Earth was saved by toxic masculinity. I mean, maybe they could rename it like the Fellowship of the Ring-Nosed or the Wilting Flowers or the Return of the Queen. I'm just throwing out some ideas to all of you to make it more inclusive, because inclusive now apparently even trumps fantasy. Where do nerds go after this? That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.